Okay. This is an exhibition about Alexandra David-Neel. She was French, but she was also partly Belgian because her mother was Belgian. And she came to Sikkim, a journey into Buddhism, 1912, 1916. Okay? So here she is as a small girl when she was 6 years old. She grew up in Brussels, first in Paris, then Brussels, and she was initially an opera singer. She sang in opera houses, even in Hanoi, in Vietnam. But singing was not enough for her. She was very interested in Buddhism. She wanted to study Buddhism and Hinduism and all these great philosophies from the East. And she was among the very, very first Buddhists in Paris and London. They formed a small group and they used to meet. And she was studying Sanskrit at the university in Paris. And she discovered Buddhist texts in the Asian Museum in Paris, which is called the Musée Guimet. Okay? So that's where she studied her first Buddhist text. But she got married. Oh, actually, she ended up in Tunisia because she was singing there at the opera house. And there she met her husband, Philippe Nel. And they married. So they stayed a few years in Tunisia, but all she was dreaming of is not having children, but traveling to India and studying the Vedas and Hinduism and Buddhism. Okay? So she had a very understanding and supportive husband who paid for her travels. And off she went, and she reached Colombo in 1911 in Sri Lanka. In those days it was Ceylon. And from Colombo, she traveled to Madras. And there she interacted a lot with Indian philosophers and yogis. And she was already, she could read Sanskrit. And by then, she had even already written a book about the Vedas. Okay? Then, when she reached Calcutta. And when she was in Calcutta, she heard that the 13th Dalai Lama was in Kalimpong. He was in Kalimpong, so of course, immediately she wanted to go and meet him. Okay? So when the transformation occurred and she became interested in Buddhism, it was not just an idea like this. She was already a very well-established scholar. Okay? And then Okay, so before we describe her Sikkim journey, I just want to highlight the three people who were the most important in her life here in Sikkim. First was the prince, second the teacher, and third the son. Okay? So Alexandra David-Neel, it's the prince, Crown Prince Tibetologist who enabled her travels to Sikkim. He invited her here. He provided all the facilities, introduced her to all the High Lamas with whom she could have discussions. So they got on extremely well. And then the teacher, his name is Lachen. That's how he's known, but actually his real name is Nawang Kunzang Rinchen, okay? And he died in 1947. He's one of the greatest accomplished masters that Sikkim has ever produced. Okay? And the third most important person is her adopted son, Lepcha boy from Ray Mindu. Actually from Mindu. No, from Ray. Okay? And he was a Lama first of Rumtek Monastery. Then he became extremely important because it is thanks to him, that she managed to reach Lhasa in 1924. There's no way she would have been able to do it without his help. And because they reached Lhasa together, incognito, she became extremely famous, and they wrote books together, and they disseminated Buddhism in the West together. Okay? Now, it was in Sikkim, I think this is important, that Alexandra learned the Tibetan language, read her first Tibetan Buddhist text, met her teacher, and was initiated into Tibetan contemplative and yogic practices. She owed all this to these three, And she also said that later she said that her years in Sikkim had been the most important of her life. She even said that she wanted to die in Sikkim. Okay? So these are the men. Come, let's go here. So, I was telling you about the 13th Dalai Lama, that's him. Okay? In Kalimpong. This is the house where he stayed in Kalimpong. Are you familiar with Kalimpong? Yeah? This is below Kalimpong, Bhutan House. There are two Bhutan houses in Kalimpong, old one and new one. Okay? This is the old one. So he stayed here. It was 150 of his suite, you know. And this was the tent where the Crown Prince of Sikkim used to stay. He stayed there while he was waiting for his audience. Okay, so Sinkyong Tulku, the Crown Prince, and Alexandra David-Neel, they met here in Kalimpong, and he invited her to Sikkim. Come. Look, this was Gangtok when she arrived. Okay? No MG mark. Huh? Nothing. Only thing, do you see the bazaar was on the ridge. You know the ridge? You know the ridge before, in front of the palace? Even, I think the Hawagar is there. Oh, I can't see it, but anyway. And this is Tibet Road going down. No MG mark. Tibetology, we're here on this hill. Okay? This is where the CM has his house now. Huh? Okay. Tatang Chen. Right. Now, full of concrete. Huh? But it was very pretty. So here she is on horseback. She traveled from Kalimpong to Gangtok. You know how long it took her on horseback to reach from Kalimpong? 3 days. They had to sleep, I think, in Redok and then in Pakyo. Okay? So it took time. And he's Pasidawa Samduk. He was her guide. And look, this is the king of Sikkim, Tudop Namgyal, the 9th king. This is how the king used to travel. No roads, no cars. Huh? Like that. Okay, come. Now, in those days, he was the king. He's the one who's being carried, okay? Tudop Namgyal. And this was his wife, okay? She was Tibetan. And this was their house, the palace. Have you been up to the Tsuglaka, the palace chapel? No? You've never been? Okay. Well, this is not there anymore. This was destroyed by fire in 1926. Now there's another building called the Tsuglaka, which is the royal chapel. So if you go and visit, maybe your teacher can take you there. You'll see. Okay? And he was a crown prince. He was Alexandra's friend, okay? Sikkim Tulku. And he was to marry this lady. And this lady is from Burma. She's a Burmese princess. Today called Myanmar. Huh? But they never married because he died. He died after their engagement. So sad, huh? And then this was his house, which is today the palace. If you go up to Tsuglaka and visit, you can see it from the gate. This is today's palace. But in those days, it was his house. You know why he stayed there and he didn't stay here with his parents? He had gone traveling around the world. He studied at Oxford for 2 years, Oxford University. And when he came back, he didn't want to stay with his family, with his parents. He wanted to have his own bachelor's den. So he built this house for himself. Okay? Okay. Now, this Sikkim Tulku, the crown prince, he wanted to reform Buddhism. When he came back from Oxford, he was in charge of monasteries, education, and forests. He's considered the father of forestry in Sikkim. Okay? But for the monasteries, he wanted to reform everything. Okay? The Sikkimese monks had no discipline and not very educated. Okay? They could perform rituals, but they hadn't traveled to Tibet to study Buddhist philosophy and all that. So the level of education in the monasteries was very low. And he wanted to change all that, and he wanted unification of all Buddhists. You know, it's like in Buddhism, you have Mahayana Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism, you have the Gelug, the Kargyupas, all the Nyingmapas, all these different sects, and everybody stays in their little cubicle. Huh? He wanted everybody to be united. This is why he's wearing a same dress as monks in Sri Lanka. Okay? And these were the two monks who were helping him do this reform project. And Alexandra, she also helped. Okay? Come. So together, Alexandra and Sikkim Tulku, they used to go on monastery inspection tours. Okay? Now this is in Lachen, Lachung, and then Lachen. This is what? Have you been to Lachen? Anybody? No. Yeah? It's changed a lot, huh? These were the original houses. Now you can only see a few of them in between concrete buildings and the monastery on top. And here she is on the yak. Huh? Then, so they were going on monastic tours. So this is Pensang. Okay, Pensang Monastery. But this monastery was destroyed by fire in 1947. So this is the only photo we have of this old monastery. Okay? Then these are the stupas in front of Pensang. And this is Podong Monastery. Podong, anybody from North? No? This is Podong Monastery. Oh yeah, you're all from Rumtek, but not from Gangtok. Huh? Gangtok is all mixed up. So it still has its thatch roof. Huh? Okay, come. Then they went on a big tour in West Sikkim. Okay, this is the Mendang and Pakyong. Huh? And then Pemayangse, Sangachuling, Rizum Monastery. Then they traveled and a little bit everywhere, still on monastery inspection tours, and they finally reached Darjeeling. When she reached Darjeeling, she was in shock. She had been now in Sikkim for many months, you know, and Sikkim in those days was really very, very nice. Okay? And so she said, as she entered Darjeeling, she reflected, "It seems to me that I'm entering an unknown world. It is a sudden, unpleasant shock, more than unpleasant, painful, as if I were falling from some paradise into an inferior world." She didn't have a very high opinion of the British, okay? The British were settled in Darjeeling. She liked Sikkim a lot more, okay? Now you see, this is her map of Sikkim. We found it in the archives, her archives. And I put all these red dots. It shows all the places she's been in Sikkim. And Rumtek, she was in Rumtek. There's a photo of Rumtek, you'll see. And then she went on a big Buddhist pilgrimage in India. Okay, come. There, Rumtek Monastery. You saw? But this is the old Rumtek Monastery. I don't think there are any photos of this monastery. I think it was rebuilt, I don't know, 50s or something, I'm not sure. So she was there in January 1914. So here she is, and this is Sikkim Tulku. And these are two monks that were helping Sikkim Tulku with his reform program. And here he is lecturing to the monks in Rumtek. Okay? Then, now she was teaching at Enche. Okay? And then the students at Enche, he said, "Let's organize a tour. Let's go to Tashiding together." So they went, and she went to Tashiding, and she gave a lecture on Guru Rinpoche. Okay? And then she went down to Sang. This photo was taken in Sang, and this dress was made for her by the monks of Sikkim. And then she went down to Rangpo, and while in Rangpo, she heard that Sir Tudap Namgyal, the ninth king, had passed away. So she quickly came back to Gangtok for the funeral in February 1940. Then Sikkim Tulku became Chogyal, he became king. So this is his first coronation. There's always two coronations. One after the 49th day of mourning, and another, the really big one, 1 year after. Okay? But the 1 year after never happened because he died. Okay? He was sick. So he only had this coronation. So Alexandra's here. That's him. That's his father's wife. And yeah, like that. Then, okay, come. Now, Sikkim Tulku, the king, was very busy. No more time to go on inspection of monastery tours. So he sends her to Podong alone. And she stays there a few months at Podong Monastery. And while she was there, she attended the cham. Okay, so this was part of the cham. And she met her future teacher, the Lachen Gongchen. Okay? Actually, they had met before, very briefly, but this is really when they got to know each other. And she was in Podong. The monks in Podong wanted to build hermitage for her. You know, a little hut at the top of the mountain where she could do her meditation. So when he heard that, he said, why don't you come to my hermitage up in the Lachen Valley, okay? There's another cave a little bit below, you can settle there. So he says, okay. This is a nice photo of Podong, of the monks in front of the monastery, in 1940s. Very rare photos like this. Okay. Let's go here. Okay, so now she decides to go to North Sikkim. Okay? So she arrives in Lachen. And these are not men. These are all the ladies from the Manila camp. Okay, the praying ladies. With Lachen Gomchen in front. And again, a photo of Lachen in those days. The monastery. And they had put their tents here in front. Okay? Come. Now, before she went up to the hermitage, okay, to see the Gomchen, she thought she had to go and see Kanchenjunga, the mountain. And she wanted to see Kanchenjunga with nothing in between, no other hills and mountains in between. She wanted to be straight in front. This is the Zemu Glacier. So she had to walk and go on yak for many days to reach this spot. She camped there for 1 or 2 nights, and then from there she went north towards Tibet. And here, this is a very important photo, okay? Because here she is up in the mountains saying goodbye to Sikkim Tulku, the king, and she would never see him again because he was going to die 3 months later. But you see this boy here? This is Yongden. This was he was to be her adopted son, okay? And guess, he's from Remindu. Okay? From Remindu, Ray actually. Yeah, you're from Remindu. From Ray or Mindu? Mindu, okay. He was from Ray, and he started as a monk, as a little lama in Rumtek Monastery. Okay? So his family is still there in Mindu. We went to visit them, but right now I forgot the name. He had no kids, but it's his brother's children who are there, grandchildren. Yeah. So here he is. So this is the first photo of him. And okay, so now she went north and she crossed into Tibet. She went to a place called Chotanima. It's very close to the Sikkimese border, okay? And it's a pilgrimage site. It's where people go on pilgrimage for purification and all that. Okay? And this is the Chotan. It gives the name to the place, Chotanima. It's believed that it traveled on a ray of sun from India to Tibet, okay? Little chicken. Okay, let's go around. Then, come. Then, okay, so then she finally makes it to the Gomchen's hermitage. Okay, and it's high up the mountain, my God, just before Tangu, above Lachen, this little village called Caleb, and from Caleb you have to walk for 3 hours up to the mountain. And it's over 4,000 meters, very high, okay? And then he had been living there already for 17 years before she arrived, okay? So he did a lot of practice, meditation, all that. And he used to travel to Tibet because his teachers were in Tibet. So here they are together, okay? Okay, so she stayed there 1 month. Then they came down to Lachen. Oh, I forgot one important thing. She asked him to be her teacher, okay? And he was not interested. He said, I'm just going to start now my 3-year retreat, a new one. I don't have time. But she begged, completed, and eventually he accepted. But for 1 year on the condition that not once she was allowed to go down to Gangtok or Kalimpong. She had to stay up in Lachen when he was in Lachen, and in Dewatang at the hermitage when he was in Dewatang. Okay? So after 1 month here, they went down to Lachen. And in Lachen, she had to stay in a little monk's hut by the Gompak. Okay? So this is all the Lachen Gomchen with all the monks at the time of the Bumkor, before the monastery. Okay? Here he is again, and this is the Losar feast. So she spent the winter in Lachen, and that's where she learned Tibetan. That's when she started reading her first text with her. This is what teacher and student do in Tibetan philosophy. They study a text together. Okay, so she learns to read, and he gives a commentary. He explains what is the meaning of this word, what is the meaning of this idea about, in philosophy, and that's how the transmission goes. Okay, so that's what they did for several months. And she also taught the ladies at the Manila Camp. Okay, now when spring came, they moved up to the hermitage at Dewata. Okay, and this was the lower hermitage where she stayed, but she found it not so comfortable, so she expanded it. She built 3 rooms around it in wood. Actually, the Dzomsa, it's like the local administrative system in Lachen. All the men of the village, they built it for her in 10 days. So she had a bedroom, she had a bathroom, she had a storeroom, like that. Okay? And she stayed there from, more than a year up here. And these were like ritual objects that the Gomchen gave to her. Okay? Now, look, the Gomchen, okay? The reason he's naked in the snow, it's because he was not getting tanned. He was practicing a Buddhist practice where you heat your body, and you can even melt the snow. And if they put a wet sheet on the body, it will dry it. It's called tumo. It's a special practice. So he was an adept of tumo. That's what she wanted to show. Okay. Now, it is said that, when she left Sikkim, later on, you'll see, she became very famous. Okay? In 1924, she became very famous, and she started writing books about Buddhism. And her books were translated in all the languages of the world. Okay? But it is here in Sikkim that she really did her Buddhist training. Not just to theory. She was also practicing, under his supervision. Okay, so he had given her the name Nishitrome, and which means lamp of wisdom, and she was the first Buddhist practitioner, Western Buddhist practitioner, okay? Ever. I mean, Westerner, So we say that through her books, she spread. It is him, the teacher, who actually managed to spread Buddhism all around the world without leaving his cave, through Alexandra David-Neel, her student. Okay? That's why it was very important to show this exhibition, because this was very early, 1924. Most people think that Buddhism spread to the West after 1959, after the Tibetan refugees left and then migrated to the West, and all the big lamas started writing books and giving teachings and all that. But it had started much earlier, and it came not from Tibet, but from here. Okay? Come. Now, she had finished her 1 year. It was, in the ashram, in the hermitage under the Gomchen. It was time to leave, okay? Now she thought, before I leave Sikkim, I will go to Tibet, quick. Nobody will know. She went incognito, with no permit, on horseback from her hermitage. It took her 1 week, and she reached Shigatse, Tashilumpo, big monastery of Tashilumpo in Shigatse, and he was the head lama of this monastery. His name is the Panchen Lama. Panchen Lama, he's the second most important lama in Tibet after the Dalai Lama. And she had to travel like this, you see, that's her tent, in order to cross the mountains. Really difficult, huh? Anyway, she spent 1 week there, and when she came back, immediately she was arrested. The British were very unhappy that she had crossed illegally. She didn't ask for permit. Well, they were not going to give her a permit anyway. So she was expelled from Sikkim. She had a few days to leave. Now, this young man, what was he going to do? He was stuck. If he stayed in Sikkim, he might end up in jail. He had done something very illegal, helping a foreigner like this, a French. You have to understand, the French and the English, they don't like each other very much, okay? So I think the English were quite happy to expel her. And so, but he was stuck. So he decided he would go with her. Okay, it's too dangerous for him to stay here. And so they left Sikkim together in 1916. They went down to Calcutta, and from there they traveled to Burma, to Korea, to Japan, and eventually to China. Okay, they traveled, and this was where they wanted to reach. They wanted to reach Lhasa. Okay, Lhasa was closed. Tibet was completely closed to foreigners. Only a few British were allowed to go. Okay, and she wanted to reach Lhasa, especially because the British had stopped her from going. Okay, she was very determined then. So first they traveled in the steppes of Tibet on the Chinese side, Chengdu, like that, and they stayed 2 years in a big monastery called Kumbum, where she really perfected her Tibetan. Okay, then they tried so many ways through Amdo, through Kham, where there's no checkpost. They tried to go incognito, and she was disguised as a beggar, as a woman. And you see, look at her face. She had to put black soot on her face, and she would travel like this and do her money. And it was the son who would walk in front and do all the talking. Even though she understood and she spoke Tibetan, she still had an accent, so she had to be careful. Okay, if they got arrested, finished. But they made it. It took 8 years for them to reach Lhasa, okay? And when she reached Lhasa, they stayed there for 2 months. It was the Tibetan New Year, so she attended all the festivities, always in secret, under the nose of the British. They didn't recognize her. There was only one man who recognized her. He was Anglo-Sikkimese, half Sikkimese, half British, and he was in charge of the police in Lhasa. And he recognized her, but his name is Ladenla. If you know Darjeeling, Ladenla was from Darjeeling. He kept quiet, and he didn't reveal her identity. He was very good. And then she exited via Shigatse and via Chumbi Valley and Sikkim. And when she arrived at the Sikkim border, the British officers were there, and she said, "Arrest me." Okay? That she made it, she did it. And the news immediately traveled all around the world. It made headlines all around the world. She was the first woman to ever make it to Lhasa. And it was the big adventure, and, without the British noticing, it was also that. And this photo is the only photo she has of her stay in Lhasa. It's in those days we didn't have negatives, and it was the negatives were glass plates. Okay, and this glass plate for this photograph, it still exists. It's in the museum, and specialists have analyzed it, and they confirm it is authentic, and they even traced it to which photo studio in Lhasa had taken this photo. Okay. So then after this, I think they were very tired and needed some rest. And they came back to France. They arrived in France in 1925. Okay? So here's Yongden. He went to France with her. Morning. Went to France, and here is the house. They bought this house, they renovated it, and they made it look a bit like a Sikkimese Nepali house, and they called it Samtenzong. Yeah. And this is where I went, because today it's a museum like here and an archive. And I went there to get all these photographs. Okay? And also to read about all her letters and all these things. So here she is in her house at Samtenzong. Okay? And she could read the Tibetan things. Okay? And then together they wrote lots of books. And the one that made her most famous is called My Journey to Lhasa. And it was translated in lots of languages all around the world. Okay? You can probably order it on Amazon for 250 rupees if you're interested. Okay? And he also wrote books. I'm reading one of his books at the moment, but it's in French. Okay? Then, now, unfortunately, Yongden, the boy from Mindu, from Ray, he died in 1955. Okay? And she lived till 101. She died in 1969. Okay, so she outlived him, and for her that was very difficult. She always thought she would go before him, but that's not what happened. Okay, so and then their ashes were brought to India and were dispersed in the Ganges at Varanasi. Okay, that's the story of Alexandra.